Hello. Today I want to talk some about coping. This is the second half of this chapter on stress and coping. I'll also talk a little bit about the research on happiness. Once again, I'll make this pretty brief, but hopefully this will help for your test on Friday. Basically, there are two major approaches to dealing with stress. One of those approaches is called problem-focused coping. The other is called emotion-focused coping. And this is a pretty simple chapter. I mean, you can tell from their names what they involve. Problem focused is trying to break down things in terms of steps, and I have to do this piece and this piece and this piece. And then just trying to get an assessment of whether your efforts are working or not. Emotion focus is just any attempt to feel better, but not solve any of the problems that you're facing. So emotion focused can actually be appropriate at times. For instance, I mean, right now in what we're dealing with, you guys know I'm a therapist. A lot about what I've been working about with my therapy clients all through FaceTime or Zoom is we can't control this virus. We can't control its spread. We can't control the fact that we need to stay at home. And so emotion-focused coping is worthwhile. At the same time, I think it's really good to keep an eye on what things are healthy and what things are unhealthy. Exercise obviously is a healthy thing, but taken to an extreme, that can be unhealthy. Sometimes people obsessively work out, and that's not particularly healthy. Sleeping is good, but too much sleeping, probably not so much. So that I mean, you can think about anything. I don't care if it's smoking weed or if it's playing video games or what. Doing too much of anything is probably not a good thing in terms of coping. One of the big things, if you do too much of anything, it's going to get in the way of any sort of problem-focused coping you can do. So even though we can't do anything about the virus, right now what you can do is try to do well in your classes, like this one, and watching this video is a step in that direction. So when I saw what you wrote last week in terms of coping, many of you were doing problem-focused coping. Some of you were talking about emotion-focused too. Last semester, one of my classes said these were their top 3 ways of coping: sleep, music, hanging out with friends. They also said they smoked weed, eating. Again, eating is one way of coping, that sometimes that can get out of control too. Trying to get a job, play with a dog, go out and party, shut down, play video games, pray, drink, all these things people do to cope. So it's probably worthwhile for you to try to assess how you're coping, and if that's what you want to keep doing, or if there are other things you can also do. As a therapist, when I try to work with clients to have them be healthier, I don't tell them, okay, you need to stop smoking weed or you need to stop drinking, because you can't take away one coping thing and just leave an empty space. It's got to be filled in with other coping strategies. So we always, when I'm working with clients, we always talk about what other things could you do instead of or in addition to what you're already doing. There are 4 factors that affect coping. I'm going to talk briefly about these. A lot of stress is really, I think, boils down to how much you can predict things and how much you can control things. I don't like this slide because it doesn't do justice to the experiment I'm going to describe. So I'm just going to show you this cute picture of a rat and talk about a mean study they did to rats. They took 4 rats and they attached their tails to a shock device. Each one of these rats was placed in front of a wheel. That is something you can see in that other video here. And there was a light in each one of the containers that the rats were in. Now, the first rat did not have any predictability or control and just got random shocks. The second rat had a little light that would come on before it got a shock. So the light would come on and it would tense up and then it would get shocked. So it had some predictability. The third rat, when it started to get a shock, it could spin that little wheel in front of its face and turn off the shock. So it had some control. And the fourth rat had both of those, predictability and control. A light would go on, it knew it was about to get a shock, it'd start spinning the little wheel and it would turn off the shock. After a period of time when they were doing this, they killed all the rats and cut them open, looked at their insides. And what they found out was basically the rats that had no predictability and no control had like stomach ulcers. Their gastrointestinal system was just all messed up. Cortisol levels that we talked about last time were really high. Their bodies were just messed up, racked from stress. The ones with the most predictability and control had the fewest amount of symptoms, and those in the middle had either predictability or control, or somewhere in the middle. Another factor about control is helplessness. Basically, this was another mean study that psychologists did, this time with dogs. And they took a dog, put him in a situation like this. It's not a very good picture, really. And basically, this is not so good. The dog cannot jump over this barrier initially, and it would just lay here and get shocks randomly. After a while, they removed this partition, and all the dog had to do was like come over here to avoid the shocks. But because it had learned in the first part of the experiment that it was helpless to escape the shock, it did not do anything to move, even when the situation changed. They call this learned helplessness because people learn at some point that they're helpless, and then later on when circumstances change and they can do something about their situation, they don't, because they learned initially that they were helpless to change things. So that could happen to people too. I often think about this in terms of domestic violence. If someone is being threatened and beaten, and sorry to get so heavy, but and they really, if they try to leave, they could be killed. They learn initially they're helpless, but circumstances can change, and when it's possible for them to escape and make it to a shelter or some other place, they won't, because they've learned that they're helpless earlier on. All right. Let's see. Another major factor affecting coping is how we make meaning of things. I mean, that's, I think by definition. Viktor Frankl was a famous psychologist who came up with a form of therapy. He was Jewish and put in a concentration camp in World War II in Germany. His whole family was killed. And it's interesting, he wrote this book that I have here called Man's Search for Meaning, which is pretty powerful stuff. And he wrote this quote here, that man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but to see meaning in his life. It's kind of sexist, but to see meaning in what you're going through. So even if you can like learn from what's going on right now, that can help you cope. Another way that people come up with meaning is through religious involvement. I put here some factors that are important in contributing to overall health in terms of religious involvement. People who are a part of faith communities typically are around people who promote healthy behaviors. There's less drinking and smoking and stuff like that. There's social support, which is huge, having friends and people to talk to. And usually there are positive emotions talked about. Hope, faith, love, and all three of those factors in terms of being involved in a faith community can do a lot to help mitigate stress. Ooh. Can't say enough about this one called social support. Having people you can count on during stressful times is critical. I hope you guys are reaching out to your friends digitally or whatever way. I think, I mean, the research shows that the more social support you have, people live longer, they're happier, they're less depressed, they have lower cortisol levels, they have fewer illnesses, they go to the hospital less. I usually do this thing in class. Oops, sorry. And this is just one way to assess your own social support. Are these things that you can count on other people for help if you needed it? Oh, this is a video I strongly encourage you to watch. And I know the assignment that I had for class this week was to ask you to come up with things that you're grateful for or people you're grateful for. This video has people writing a letter about a person in their life they're grateful for, and then they ask them to call that person and read the letter to them. I can't help it. I get tears in my eyes each time I watch that video, so it's good. I really strongly encourage you to just click on it and watch it. And also, that's part of the assignment I did for you guys. You know, and people write down things that they're grateful for, like over and over again, like each day, they are happier for like months later. So it's another reason I came up with that assignment for you guys. Other stress reduction techniques, I always talk about exercise, meditation. Again, that can just be counting your breaths, I mean, just simple breathing things like this, where you like take a big deep breath in, hold it, and then breathe out on the count of 7, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then do it again. Hold it, and then breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you can try that and do that like 8 times, it slows everything down and it's helpful. I want to describe biofeedback because I think you know what it is, but you may not know the term. That is having like sensors on your fingers, on your chest, it's EEG stuff too. It's having your computer read your bio signs, your heart rate, your breathing rate, your sweat response, your blood pressure, and then you're reading those results on a computer screen as you try to relax. So you're getting feedback from the computer about your biological functioning. As you get that feedback, you can start to see, when am I relaxing? How am I controlling or influencing my relaxation response? That's what biofeedback is, and it's very powerful. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about happiness. There's research on this. I'd encourage you to, I mean, if anytime I'd say read a chapter in your book, it'd be this chapter, because with stress and coping being so important right now, you can only learn something valuable in it. So please read about that and read about the happiness part too. Basically, what we know about long-term happiness is that big events come and go and they fade, and we're resilient. I mean, when they're bad, we'll have a down period, but we'll usually bounce back to our average level of happiness. So, I mean, it's, they call it a happiness set point. So it's like, we're kind of cruising along here, something bad happens, it goes down, then we come back up, or even something good happens. Like I put up here, if we win the lottery, you think, oh, my life would be so much better. It's usually only like that, then it comes back to the level of happiness the person was at before. If you look at research on happiness and income, basically you have to have a certain amount of income in order to have just a moderate degree of happiness. But I mean, after a certain amount, it really kind of all blends together. I mean, if you look at, I mean, these lines and look at this graph, the people who said they experience happiness, enjoyment every day, once you reach about a family income of $60,000 a year, there's not much fluctuation there. And those who said they did not feel stressed out yesterday, again, once you reach a certain, where you can take care of your bills and you have enough predictability and control, money does not influence happiness as much as most people like to think. If you look at the poorest and richest countries, the happiness rankings for these different countries, US is not even in the top 10. Yeah, interesting. Counting your blessings, basically, that is the gratitude thing that we've been talking about. And the research shows you write down 3 good things that happen each day, led to an increase in happiness that lasted over 6 months. Downward comparison, I put the picture of the graveyard because at least we're not dead. But comparing like to other people who don't have as good as we have, even though we may feel our circumstances are really bad, realizing other people have it worse can also help us feel more grateful for what we do have. Other ways to increase happiness, to practice mindfulness. I have a video link here if you want to learn more about that. Not holding grudges and trying to forgive people is important. All these things I have up here are pretty good. I put cognitive therapy because that's one of the techniques I use, cognitive behavioral therapy. And how people talk to themselves is huge in determining happiness. A lot of times people don't even realize how much they're blaming themselves. They're downgrading themselves. They're basically screaming at themselves, calling themselves bad names. Catching that, stopping it, and replacing it with more positive and loving self-statements is huge. So if you're interested, look up YouTube videos on cognitive behavioral techniques. And that's it for today. I hope you learned something from this. And the assignment is due today. The test will be posted later today, and will be due Friday. Take care.